1281. The waters off the coast of Kyushu are crowded in a way that has no precedent in the medieval world. Kublai Khan, ruler of the largest contiguous land empire in human history, has assembled two separate invasion forces converging on a single stretch of Japanese coastline. The Eastern Fleet carries 40,000 soldiers aboard 900 vessels. The Jiangnan fleet carries 100,000 more across 3,500 ships. Combined, it is the largest amphibious assault ever attempted on Earth to this point. The Mongol commanders have already taken islands in the outer chain. They've fought Japanese samurai on the beach at Hakata Bay. They know the terrain, they know the resistance, and they are patient. Then something appears on the horizon that has no business being in these waters. A gray shape, angular, moving at 30 knots against no wind and no visible effort. It is the USS Arleigh Burke, a guided missile destroyer commissioned in 1991 and built for one specific task: to find and destroy enemies across every dimension of the battlefield simultaneously. So what happens when 4,400 Mongol warships meet a single modern destroyer? The ship first. The Arleigh Burke class is 509 feet long, displacing 9,200 tons at full load. It moves on gas turbines that produce 100,000 shaft horsepower. It doesn't care about wind direction. It doesn't care about the tides running through Hakata Bay. Its AN Spy 1D phased array radar system operates continuously across all four quadrants without rotating, tracking hundreds of contacts at once, assigning each one a threat classification and a targeting solution before any crew members has touched a weapons console. The ship carries 96 vertical launch cells in the bow and stern. Those cells hold a combination of RAM-66 Standard missiles, BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles, RUM-139 ASROC anti-submarine rockets depending on the loadout. For a surface engagement against wooden vessels, the weapons officer doesn't reach for any of them first. He reaches for the MK-45 5-inch gun on the forward deck. It fires 20 rounds per minute to a range of 13 nautical miles with precision guidance. Against a fleet of medieval warships packed hull to hull across a bay, that gun alone changes the entire premise of the engagement. The Mongol fleet. This cannot be dismissed. Kublai Khan's naval commanders are not improvising. The 1281 invasion fleet is the product of years of logistical coordination across two of the most sophisticated bureaucratic empires on Earth: the Yuan dynasty and the remnants of the Song naval establishment that was absorbed into it. The flat-bottomed invasion barges are designed specifically to beach directly onto Japanese shores and discharge cavalry and infantry without a port. The larger command vessels carry stone-throwing catapults, fire weapons, enough soldiers with composite bows to put thousands of arrows in the air within seconds. Mongol archers on horseback had already broken armies across Russia, Persia, and Poland. Their commanders understand combined arms warfare at a level most of the medieval world never reached. The fleet's sheer scale is the strategy. 4,400 hulls pressing into a single bay create a density that is supposed to overwhelm any fixed coastal defense through mass alone. That logic is sound against everything the 13th century can produce. What it cannot account for is a ship that sees the entire bay from 13 miles away in complete darkness. The Burke arrives at approximately 0300. The Mongol fleet is anchored in tight formation, as the historical record describes, linked by chains between vessels to create a stable fighting platform against Japanese night raids. The radar picture the Combat Information Center receives is extraordinary. 4,400 discrete contacts, sorted, classified, and tracked simultaneously. The largest concentration of hulls are mapped in under 2 minutes. The command ships are identifiable by their size, and the thermal signatures of the fires kept burning on their elevated decks. The weapons officer designates the first target cluster. The MK-45 opens up at 0317. The first shells arrive with no warning a Mongol sailor can interpret. There is no bow wave visible, no battle cry, no approaching shape in the darkness. There is simply an impact, then another, then fire spreading across linked hulls that cannot separate from each other because of the chain connections that were supposed to be a tactical advantage. On the command ships, officers are shouting for information that nobody can provide because nobody within this fleet has a framework for what's happening. The composite bowmen scan the darkness and find nothing to shoot at. The catapults cannot range a target they cannot see. The fire spreads across the chained sections faster than bucket lines can respond. This was because these holes are packed with pitch, oil, provisions, the equipment of 140,000 soldiers. The chain connections between vessels designed to prevent Japanese fire ships from separating the fleet now prevent burning ships from being pushed away from undamaged ones. Within the first 20 minutes, 3 command ship clusters are destroyed, not damaged. The ammunition magazines and fuel stores aboard the larger vessels cook off in secondary explosions that the Mongol soldiers nearest them would have no category for. The psychological effect inside the fleet at this point is total. These are soldiers who have ridden across steppes and mountain passes, who have sacked cities from Beijing to Baghdad, but they're sitting in darkness on wooden ships watching sections of their fleet disappear in fire that arrives from nowhere. There is no tactical response available to them. Running is not possible. The bay is crowded to a degree that makes coordinated movement nearly impossible even in daylight, let alone in darkness and chaos. Now the Burke closes range. At 8,000 yards, the targeting solutions are straightforward. The ship begins working systematically across the densest concentration of hulls, moving from the Jiangnan fleet's transport barges toward the Eastern Fleet's command section. Each salvo from the 5-inch gun hits inside the formation, so compressed that a shot missing its primary aim point still finds another hull within meters. The Mongol commanders who are still functioning begin ordering soldiers into the water to attempt to swim toward the shore or toward undamaged vessels further from the initial strike zones. Thousands of men enter Hakata Bay simultaneously. The water temperature in late summer is survivable, but the distances involved, combined with full armor and weapons, make the math brutal. The Burke has not yet used a single missile. By first light, the scale of what has happened is visible in a way the darkness concealed. Burning holes across several square miles of water, chains connecting vessels that are partly submerged, pulling others down alongside them. The Jiangnan's fleet's rear sections, furthest from the initial strikes, are attempting to organize a response. Some commanders have ordered their remaining catapults loaded and aimed at the gray shape now visible on the morning water. The stones fall short by thousands of meters. The composite bows lose volleys toward it. The arrows land in water at a fraction of the range required. The Burke sits at a distance the Mongols' fleet's weapons simply cannot reach, and it continues working. The Hojo regents defending Kyushu would have been watching from the coastal fortifications they'd spent the previous 7 years building after the first invasion in 1274. What they saw on the morning of the second invasion was not what they'd prepared for. The defensive walls along Hakata Bay, the samurai cavalry staged in the hills above the beach, the fire ships being readied in the harbor, none of it was needed. The threat they'd spent years anticipating was being dismantled from the water by something none of them could explain, and none of them needed to understand in order to recognize the result. The tomahawks remain in their cells. There is no land target the Burke's commander needs to reach. The Mongol army of 140,000 soldiers was aboard those ships. Without the fleet, the invasion is not slowed. It does not regroup at a secondary landing site. It simply ceases. The logistical chain stretching back to the Chinese mainland, the supply convoys, the follow-on forces, the replacement weapons and horses, has no way to function without the fleet that was supposed to secure the crossing. The soldiers who make it to shore, some number do, arrive without cohesion, without cavalry, without the organizational structure that made the Mongol war machine what it was. They are not an invasion force, they are survivors. Kublai Khan at his court at the Khambalik would receive reports that would have been impossible to interpret accurately. The fleet did not founder in a typhoon this time, as the historical record describes happening weeks after the actual 1281 invasion. The fleet did not encounter weather. The fleet encountered something the Mongol intelligence network that stretched across most of the known world at that point had no source capable of describing. The Khan had broken kingdoms with the most advanced military thinking of the 13th century. He had no doctrine for a threat category that didn't exist. The Burke's magazine after the engagement would show significant expenditure of 5-inch rounds. Not catastrophic depletion, but meaningful. The fuel state after sustained high-speed maneuvering as a confined bay would require the ship to consider its next port of call. A problem without a clean solution in 1281 AD. The crew would have fresh water for several more weeks. Food stocks would run out before that becomes a pressing issue. And there is no resupply chain, no tender, no logistics vessel running fuel and ordnance out to Hakata Bay from a friendly port. What the Burke carried into the engagement is all it has. What happens to the crew after the last round is fired and the last drop of fuel is burned in these waters remains a question the historical record of 1281 has no entry for.